Welcome to part 2 of Tobago Chronicles. This series is intended to highlight the trailblazing exploits of Tobago's sons and daughters in the development of independent Trinidad and Tobago. Last week, you would have seen episode 1, which highlighted the role of PUSH, saluting 25 years of PUSH effort in Tobago. But as we move more and more into the regular programming of this series, Tobago Chronicles, the primary focus would be on these Tobago sons and daughters and the role they have played in national development. It's a retrospective look at their efforts starting from the 1960s. So over the next few episodes, we will trace the performance, the exploits, the endeavor of our people. In this first episode, the people who will come into focus include A.N.R. Robinson and Basil Pitt in the political sphere. C.R. Otley, a very well-known author, will also be in focus, and a sports icon, Michael Hercules. So we'll go to the piece in a little while that I was very instrumental in creating, and we'll look at that first focus in the 1960s. And in the final segment, we will return to the chronicles of PUSH and the impact our organization has made over 25 years. So look out for Anne-Marie as she has a meaningful chat with one of the founding members, Dedan Daniel. Let's take on the look at Tobago Chronicles 1960s. Trinidad and Tobago attained independence on August the 31st, 1962. The country was led at that time by its first Prime Minister, Dr. Eric Eustace Williams. Dr. Eric Eustace Williams pursued the management of this country, relying on expertise from Trinidad and from the little island of Tobago. This really is a chronicle of the trailblazing accomplishments of Tobagonians in broad areas of endeavor within the political administration as well as in terms of societal endeavors. Successive PNM administrations till 1986 relied on Tobago intellect and expertise to chart and execute policies that issued national progress in foreign relations, agriculture, policing, education, culture, and public finance. Other Tobagonians were trailblazers in the sporting arena, business, music, and the arts. In fact, a handful of them also distinguished themselves in parliamentary affairs. Many of the trailblazing personalities completed schooling in Tobago and journeyed to Trinidad in an effort to advance themselves. Some actually worked in Tobago before their gifts became integral to national progress. Even before independence was attained, Dr. Eric Williams, our chief minister, was partly reliant on the Tobago intellect in the functioning of his administration. Victor Bruce and Carlton R. Otley were highly respected public servants addressing public finance and community development policy matters in the late 1950s. In December 1961, the general election campaign by the Williams-led People's National Movement brought two bright young attorneys into the public spotlight: Arthur Napoleon Raymond Robinson and Basil Pitt. These two became parliamentarians with the victorious PNM. Robinson representing Tobago East and Basil Pitt representing Tobago West. The latter would eventually fulfill numerous portfolios within the PNM administration till his death in 1985. Arthur Robinson became the first finance minister of independent Trinidad and Tobago. Before this, he, an Oxford-educated attorney, was in private practice. He joined the PNM, led by Dr. Eric Williams in 1956, and eventually found himself a member of the parliament in the short-lived West Indies Federation from 1958. When Williams led Trinidad and Tobago to independence after the Federation collapsed, Robinson then began to serve as the first Minister of Finance. He also acted as Prime Minister when Dr. Williams traveled overseas. Robinson was virtually responsible for the TT dollar becoming sole legal tender by July 1967, the time when the British Caribbean currency was officially withdrawn. After serving 6 years in Ministry of Finance, Mr. Robinson then held the portfolio of External Affairs from 1967 until 1970, when he resigned as Member of Parliament and left the PNM over the government's handling of a failed Black Power revolution in 1970. His political career took a dip, but Robinson went on to build a power base in Tobago, gaining re-election as one of its MPs. He then piloted through Parliament the historic Tobago House of Assembly Act in 1980. Benjamin Llewellyn Basil Pitt was born in 1924. He attended Bishop's High School and was an accomplished attorney, having studied at the Inns of Court in London. He was first elected a Member of Parliament for Tobago West in 1961 and served as Parliamentary Secretary. Thereafter, Pitt served as Deputy Speaker of the House from 1963 to 1966. He spent a large part of his career representing Tobagonians, having served as the Parliamentary Secretary for Tobago Affairs and the Minister of State for Tobago Affairs. He was also the Member of Parliament for Tobago West and a former Deputy Speaker of the House from 1963 to 66 in the first independent Parliament. Pitt was elevated to cabinet status in 1971, serving as Minister of National Security, before Prime Minister Williams named him Minister of Legal Affairs and Attorney General, following the exit of the distinguished barrister Carl Hudson Phillips in 1973. Indeed, Pitt is still the only Tobagonian to have held the national security portfolio. He ended his parliamentary life in 1976, but Prime Minister Williams bestowed diplomatic status on Pitt, appointing him High Commissioner to Canada and to Barbados at different times. Trinidad and Tobago had barely celebrated its first anniversary of independence when Tobago was ravaged by Hurricane Flora on September 30th, 1963. It was the first national emergency that the PNM government
was handling. Flora wrecked houses and, to some extent, families in Tobago. And it initially crippled the functioning of the Williams administration, according to one senior technocrat of the day. It was then that the influence of Tobagonians in this relatively new administration became clear. Senior figures in the public service from Tobago were personally affected by the catastrophe, including Eugenio Moore, then architect of the first National Development Plan from 1961 to 66, Doddridge Allen, permanent secretary, J.D. Elder, then the Prime Minister's advisor on Best Village competitions, Victor Bruce, director of personnel administration at the time, and Carlton Otley, who served as director of community development. In those early years, Dr. Eric Williams did not fail to notice another Tobagonian distinguishing himself in sport and placing the young nation on the world map in bodybuilding. Michael Artie Hercules was the four-time champion of the West Indies from 1961 till 1964. And he was the Mr. Trinidad and Tobago champion for the period 1960 to 65. However, it was his second place finish in the 1961 Mr. Universe competition held in Montreal, Canada, that placed Hercules and Trinidad and Tobago in the world spotlight. Officially, Chris Snipes, the blonde American, was awarded the crown, but the majority of the audience hailed Michael Hercules the deserving winner of the competition. Hercules, with his massive frame, was often considered the most perfectly developed man on the international scene. He competed with the best, using rudimentary equipment in a makeshift gym for all bodybuilding competitions till he moved to Trinidad after Hurricane Flora in 1963. In 5 other trips to the Mr. Universe competition, Hercules placed in the top 5. He earned at least 2 victories in the medium height class, however. He was already 3 years in the employ of the prison service when he retired from the international competition. Michael Hercules always believed body and brains had to be developed simultaneously, and he earned several certificates before completing his law degree. He would go on to make significant strides in the Trinidad and Tobago prison service, which will be highlighted later on. Hercules was named among the 50 greatest sporting personalities from Trinidad and Tobago since independence in the year 2012. MacArthur Sandy, better known as Calypso Rose, fueled a gender debate in 1966 when she was denied the coveted Road March title for the infectious Fire in Mawaya, which sustained popularity in 1966 Carnival and remained vastly popular during the 1967 Carnival. It was Sparrow singing "Oh Be a Wedding" who was officially given the Road March title in 1966. The Tobagonians were not the only objectors to this injustice. Sympathizers were from all walks of life in Trinidad. The Carnival Development Committee claimed that Rose's monster hit was too short on verses to be eligible and restated the rules of a calypso rendition which qualified for contention as a road march song. A decade later, Rose had her revenge under the substantive rules of the Carnival Development Committee. It is also important to understand that in the year following Rose's experience with that song, Tobagonians made their presence felt in the Best Village competition of 1967. It was in that year, 1967, that the Best Village program was expanded to include 5 categories. Bell Garden Village Council gave a tremendous display in that competition that year and were considered the winners of the 1967 Best Village competition, which marked the 5th anniversary of independence. However, it was superior that the judges crowned the champions on the night in 1967, with Kumuto coming second and Belgarden coming third. This further heightened the view that Tobagonians were experiencing disparities and injustice, and in fact, Belgarden refrained from competing in competitions of the Best Village for several years thereafter. One lasting memory of Belgarden's participation is in the food category, in which they produced a beautiful menu that found its way into the Trinidad Hilton's culinary menu and continued to be a major diet for those tourists who sampled the cuisine at the Hilton. In addition to Basil Pitt and Robinson, Lionel Robinson joined his younger brother A&R in the Williams government. He was named Cabinet Minister for Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries and served in that position until 1971. In fact, Lionel Robinson stands as the first Tobagonian to contest and win a seat in Trinidad when he represented Toco Manzanilla in 1966. He went on to win that constituency 3 more times, exiting from the politics in 1981. As the nation entered into its 2nd decade, the Tobago intellect was associated with far-reaching initiatives that gave the country an economic foundation and social character. Jacob D. Elder was the architect of several cultural initiatives as an advisor to Prime Minister Williams. His intellectual genius, combined with his deep understanding of anthropology of his native land, benefited the PNM administration in the 1960s. Elder conceptualized the Best Village competition, which showcased sports, culinary arts, and folk arts within villages. It remained very popular during the lifetime of Dr. Williams and still holds some importance on the cultural calendar of Trinidad and Tobago today.
According to the definition of the post by the CPO and such persons, I am supposed, in the first instance, to advise government through the Minister of Culture and so on upon the Cultural Development Program as a national undertaking. Apart from that, I am to assist that ministry, not merely by advising them, but by actually going into the field and training government officers who are involved in culture and the arts with respect to Caribbean culture in general and the culture of Trinidad and Tobago in particular.
Eugenio Moore, another Charlottesville son, moved from permanent secretary to position of advisor to Dr. Williams, and he was the principal architect of the second five-year development plan, 1968 to 73. His policies were anchored in an industrialization trust, which proved more significant when oil prices skyrocketed following the formation of an oil cartel popularly referred to as the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC. Extravagance followed for another decade, with development planning directed by others, while Eugenio Moore's expertise seemed to have declined in importance. It was Doddridge Allen, the third Charlottesville son, who proved to be the super technocrat of that first decade of independence. He fulfilled permanent secretary duties in finance, planning, and development, and then served as head of the public service. Several state companies owe their existence to the endeavors of Moore and Allen, namely the formation of the Industrial Development Corporation, Shell Trinidad, Carney Trinidad Limited, Trintoc, Texaco Trinidad Limited, National Commercial Bank, and National Flour Mills. In fact, Doddridge Allen was lead negotiator in the transfer of petroleum companies from foreign ownership to local ownership during the 1970s. Some of the deals were responsible for the eventual emergence of what is called Petrotrin today. Allen's track record in public administration led to recognition within the Commonwealth region, and he was nabbed by the government of Kenya and given a position of country advisor on United Nations matters from the period 1980 till 1982. Prime Minister George Chambers, who succeeded Dr. Eric Williams after his premature death in 1981, worked to entice the brilliant Tobagonian to take up the distinguished post of Trinidad and Tobago's permanent representative to the United Nations. Allen brought much esteem to Trinidad and Tobago and this region when he served a term as president of the United Nations Security Council during his 5-year stint in the diplomatic service. He also had other chairmanships during his stint and raised this country's profile in the UN, which lasted for many years thereafter. So Whitehall was privileged to have the services of Tobagonians who actually contributed significantly in the first decade. These Tobagonians went in and out of Whitehall, fulfilling various roles as indicated in the earlier commentary.
With us as we examine the Chronicles of the Push Foundation. We have one of the founding members, Mr. Dedan Daniel. Mr. Daniel, welcome
Yes.
to Tobago Chronicles.
Thank you so much for having me.
Very nice. So I want to delve right into maybe your interpretation of what the society was like back then. What were the significant things that would have inspired or led to the creation of the Push Foundation?
Well, as the name of the organization suggests, people united to save our heritage. It was the feeling or the consideration at the time that there was different aspects of our heritage whether he talks about heritage in terms of land ownership, where he talks about environmental protection, about youth development work in recognizing the contribution of our icons in society, there was a feeling that that was going amiss. And Mr. Phillips and the other founders of the organization, we came together to actually solve that problem. So to let people know that there are certain aspects of our heritage that needs to be protected, needs to be preserved, needs to be enhanced. And that was the impetus for forming the PUSH organization.
Okay, so what in your mind was worth then? Because given the name of the organization, People United to Save Our Heritage, what were the things that stood out for you in the society that the organization identified with that needed to be preserved in our heritage?
Well, one of the main things that stood out for me, especially as a youth at the time, is that there seemed to be a gap in terms of the type of contributions that we could make to move our society forward. There was a lack of understanding or knowledge, rather, of what has gone before, and the foundation that has been set by some of our predecessors who would have done a whole lot of work to move Tobago forward, the country forward, the island, the Caribbean, the world, in fact. Right? They would have made a whole lot of sterling contributions, and there was a gap between what they did and what we need to understand the foundation that was built, so that the work that we do could be built upon it. So for me, that is one of the things that really stand out.
Right.
And so that for me, in a particular way, is part of the heritage that was missing, that legacy, the inspiration that these persons could impart and imbue on persons, so that in the work that we do, we know that we come in the heels of persons who would have done great things, and then it's time for us to make contributions to do certain things. Also in the context that there was aspects of our culture, our heritage, that was going amiss, and we need to do something.
Right. So it was about standing up as a young person back then and associated with reclaiming that heritage.
Yes, indeed.
Preserving something.
Yes.
So let's get a little bit into you before we talk a little bit more about the organization. Being a member of that organization, how old were you around that time?
About 23.
Right. Okay. So you were really in the prime of your youth.
Yes.
And so what role did you play in the PUSH Foundation?
Well, it was various roles. One of the main things about as a participant, I was able to participate in terms of my own personal development, to involve in some of the environmental activities, in some of the physical education activities, in some of the aspect of trying to build entrepreneurship and so on the island. I was freshly minted as a degree bachelor's person, and I was working with the small business development company then, or business development company then, and I saw it as an opportunity to help persons to develop their entrepreneurial abilities. So that was part of the thing, and also to help youths in particular. I remember facilitating sessions with as with respect to business development and entrepreneurial development.
Oh, great.
Yes.
So you were both like a recipient of some of the work of the organization, as well as an architect involved in designing and passing on your training to others. I guess as a young budding professional.
Yes.
Okay, as you say. So I would imagine that any organization, particularly a non-governmental organization such as the PUSH Foundation, would have its own challenges in terms of how it resources the organization.
Yes.
So back then, could you tell us a little bit about that, and how did the organization attract resources to being able to achieve some of those objectives that it set?
Well, the major resources I think that we were able to attract was the human resource. We had a lot of persons there who were really committed to the vision and mission of the organization, and they too felt the need, that unmet need in society, and that is what it inspired them to contribute their time and their expertise in terms of doing the work of the organization. Mr. Phillips was able to gather some resources, some some other non-governmental organization, government
Right.
organization. Meager as it is, we was able to multiply the effect of it and do a marvelous amount of work.
Yeah. You know, I saw in one of the articles I was reading in this paper here, maybe our viewers can take a look at it.
Mr.
This
Phillips
was a
young.
pullout when Mr. Phillips was young. We
Young
should
and
take a
green, fresh
closer
and
look at
green.
it, right?
All of us.
Right. So this is one of the pullout, a feature on the Push Foundation. I'm looking at here in 2006, and it speaks to several achievements of the organization and so on. But and I couldn't help but noticing here that the organization received a grant, as you said, from the UNDP of some $50,000, and I know back then that must have been plenty money, you know. To be able to, you know, contribute to his work. But there must have been some challenges, you know, operating in the Tobago society, as we know, with some of the limitations that we have. Could you speak to maybe what were some of the challenges that you experienced back then in being able to achieve the objectives that you set?
Some of it is attracting, some of the resources like physical resources. Remember we had meetings and so on, like my breakfast shed. It wasn't the most old breakfast shed. It wasn't the most. It wasn't 5-star accommodation, but it was a space necessary that we got to use.
Right. But just for our viewers to understand, that breakfast shed was a real breakfast shed where people went and had meals.
Yes.
Because as a student at Scarborough Anglican, we went to breakfast shed for school feeding and milk and biscuit.
Yes.
Exactly. So breakfast shed was one of the facilities in the Scarborough area where groups, non-governmental organizations could meet and that kind of thing. So you were saying that, pick it up from there.
So we was able to have access to some of these resources, right? In terms of space to be able to do the work that we needed to do. We depended heavily on volunteerism. We had some people that like Ken Biscombe, Edward Ted Jones, who else, boy? Those two names really come to mind. Who was able to lend their time and their resources to help us. Of course, finance was a problem. At the time, we were elated that we was able to get that little pittance from UNDP. Because at the time as well, organizations in Tobago didn't access funds from UNDP. Didn't. So in that sense, it was kind of pioneering in that sense, right? So we were able to. But while we have challenges in actually accessing these resources from different organizations, I think the commitment and the vision that started the organization in the first place was able to multiply the little monies and resources that we have and make a huge impact.
And I like that you say the volunteerism, and I want you to stay with that for a minute and tell us in those early days, because I could well imagine not having the physical space that you might have had, not all of the resources, but you indicated earlier that your human resource was your strength. So I want you to go back, you know, because as the Chronicle takes a look at organization and how organization is formed and structured, tell me a little bit about those early years. Within the first year, what was the coming together like in terms of forming the organization and what that meant in the Tobago space? Because as you said, there were not many organizations operating at the level of which the Push Foundation was.
So in some of the early days, I can remember vividly, we had to do a lot of fundraisings to get some of the resources. I remember one night, the late Elton Keith, Mr. Phillips, myself, we had was a boiled corn boil with sausage and boiled corn and some other stuff that we had to put together, and we sold it in Shaw Park at community events and so on. Those are some of the things that we did.
So you raised your own funds?
Yeah, we had to raise our own funds.
And you did things like, tell me some, the boiled corn boil, what else comes to mind?
I think it was some of the carnival fets. We used to juice and soft drinks and those kind of things. You know, grassroots things. We did some pastries, all those kind of different things. people using their culinary skills, and we did those things to raise some of the resources that we need, because for our organizations, you must be able to show, especially donor organizations, you have to show a certain level of contribution. Right? They don't fund you 100%, so you had to demonstrate that you
had to put something in it. And that is interesting to me, you know, Didan, because many organizations in today, when you ask about the source of funding and how they get started, everybody starts with, we get funding from THA, and we get, and so far I didn't hear you mention government in terms of your source of financing and supporting the organization. And I mean that is commendable, because it means you started as an independent organization using your own initiative and creativity towards financing of the organization. Okay, so anything else stands out for you in that first year of coming together?
Well, the level of camaraderie that the core group had. We had an organizational structure, and that is very important, because that is what allows things to happen. You don't operate haphazardly, right? And based on the level of dedication that we did have and demonstrated to the things that we did, it gained a certain level of attraction, and then it started to attract resources, right? So the things that we did in the early stage was like the investment that we made towards attracting resources, persons and organizations, and later down the THA, to be able to help in some of the work that we did. But we demonstrated that track record based on the meager resources that we have, the level of dedication and commitment, the strong driving vision, and because of that and the traction built, other organizations start to align themselves and contribute resources and so on, and that has helped with the whole multiplier effect.
So how long did it take for you to see that kind of turn around, where you were now being called on and people were now requesting your services and requesting the organization to do things and so on?
I would think within about 4 years or so. Yeah, so we had to work in the vineyards really up to be able to demonstrate that our value proposition to the stakeholders, and then they were able to come on and so on.
Okay, so now we have identified the early years and your formation and those issues. Tell me about any of the particular projects that might have stood out for you that the Push Foundation would have been involved in, and maybe what were the gains or the successes that you had?
Two of them readily stand out: the Youth Build program. So that program,
I was hoping you would say that.
Youth Build, right? And again, the name says it all. It's about working with youths. Okay, you see, they are at the prime stage of their life that need direction and motivation and guidance and so on. And that program was able to help to build the skills, the burgeoning skills of a lot of youths on the island to be able to progress in life as in the way they are today. And people like Wayne John, or those people readily come to mind. You know, we call him the youngest veteran, right? I mean, he's a premier filmmaker, right? People like that was able to benefit from the program and do marvelous work. We have people in the information division who works as videographers and so on. All of them would have benefit. And one of the nice things is that with the Youth Build, it focused on the holistic development of the youth. It wasn't just about inserting career skills or personal development skills. It dealt with the whole person, the holistic development aspect. And so that was pretty good.
So in a little nutshell, for the benefit of our viewers who may not know that name and the details of what this program was, give us in a little synopsis of what was the Youth Build program and how it functioned.
Right, so while the core was about skill development, and again the whole holistic aspect of it, you will go through things like physical education and so on to build the mental and physical fitness, because you will need that for a program like that, right? And there was different craft skill areas like hairdressing, beauty culture, wig making, film and videography, business, all these different things. Certain art and craft disciplines, electronics, these kind of things, they was able to benefit from the technical skill, the personal development aspect, and the holistic in terms of itself.
And just again, for the benefit of our listeners, were there any other programs like that around? Did we have YTEP? Did we have, those things? Any of those things existed?
Yes,
in the
YTEP and so on was in the early stages. I was one of those persons who benefit from YTEP.
Right.
Yes, so these programs were in stage, and some of our trainees would have benefited from YTEP as well, right? As graduates from the program, so they was able to build on the skills that they have, or acquire new skills, because at that stage in life, it may not be certain as to the direction that you want your life to go. So persons would have been able to, while some of them would have been in some of those programs, they settled on our program, but the differentiating thing about the Youth Build program is the whole holistic thing.
Well, that's what I would have thought, because even as I asked the question, I myself was thinking that in those days, I didn't remember YTEP, but I remembered Youth Build.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it maybe speaks to the impact that it had on the Tobago society in terms of the involvement and the transformation that it had.
Yeah.
What was significant about it that stuck? And so you're saying that the character development of the individual as well as the skills that they were able to acquire.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah, and I would think in some way it sort of inspired the mushrooming of the writer program and so on, because while it was at its early seed stage, it didn't have the kind of impact that it had. And with a program like Youth Build that did the type of work that it did, then you will see these other programs start to mushroom and explode, and the rest is history.
All right, excellent. And a good history at that.
Yes, indeed.
All right. So any other programs or initiatives of the Push Foundation outside of that Youth Build program, because that would have impacted the youth population and persons working there, that stands out for you?
Yes, our organization was able to do our next pioneering project, the whole thing about the glass recycling. I can recall in Rockley Vale, if my memory serves me correctly, we had an arrangement with Carib Glass where we would collect glass and we pack them and so on, and to take them back to the factory and as a recycling project. So that was done really for the environmental impact, and also it was an income earner for the organization, because you had to sustain yourself.
Right, yes.
Right? So the big thing about that, in my mind, is that it pushed the whole idea of environmental sustainability, because a glass doesn't rotten, and it will stay in the environment and breed mosquito and make it ugly and that kind of stuff. But it kind of spark a kind of consciousness that, and I've talked earlier about aspect of our heritage, and in the past the care for our environment was a big thing. Now what this spurred at that point in time is that we had to protect our environment, and the glass recycling project was one of the things that sort of created that not just created, but I would say expanded the consciousness that we need environmental care and sustainability.
And I think that is what is admirable about the organization, because when you speak to the heritage, you're not only talking about culture and the arts and so on, but you're talking about the core things about Tobago, economy, sustaining our environment, and all that as part of the heritage of Tobago. So let's come forward, let's jump into the now scenario in terms of understanding where that history has gone and where now is the Push Foundation in terms of its heritage. What is the organization doing in the present that is linking some of that rich history that you would have had?
All right. Now, one of the key things that is long-standing and still operating currently is the whole Icons project, right? For a lot of us, we don't know about the history and contribution of, I started off earlier by saying that a lot of persons would have made the contributions that set the foundation and the platform for succeeding generations to do what they need to do to help to build the society, right? And that Icon project was one of the things that was groundbreaking, in the sense that it's seek to chronicle the work of a whole lot of notable Tobagonians who would have made contributions both locally, nationally, internationally, globally, right? And it serves as a source of inspiration for a whole lot of persons to say, well, okay, this is from where we came.
Yes.
This is the contribution. So we know that we have big shoes basically to fill, right? And it will let people know of the enormity of the task that they have at present to be able to create the type of society that we all aspire for our succeeding generation. So I think that was really notable, right? That it captured, because you didn't see it wrong, you know, and I'm glad that it was done, and it's there for succeeding generations to be able to view them as a source of inspiration, to know that, hey, we come from good people.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And so you're bringing the past into the future,
yes.
preserving our heritage.
Indeed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Daniel, and this has been Tobago Chronicles.
Thank you so very much for having me.